5, 4, 3. We have ignition. And liftoff.
For the first time in over 50 years, a privately built rocket was successfully launched. And we'll put a quote around successfully launched into space. It was a successful launch, but unfortunately the lunar lander will not make it to the moon. Astrobotic, the company that built the rocket, called off the trip, blaming a propellant leak. To understand exactly what happened, we wanted to bring in an expert.
Yeah, let's break this down with space historian and professor of science communication at the University of Chicago, Jordan Bimm, back with us. Good morning, Jordan.
Hi, great to be with you.
Good to be with you, too. Always a pleasure to have you to help us with this kind of stuff. We're not space experts here on the stream.
No.
All right, so what exactly went wrong here? What happened?
Right. So what we saw a couple days ago was the launch of this new Vulcan Centaur rocket from the United Launch Alliance. And that new rocket launched just perfectly. Unfortunately, the spacecraft that it carried inside, which was headed towards the moon, the spacecraft built by a private company called Astrobotic was the one that suffered an anomaly. And as you mentioned, there was a propellant leak, which means it will not be able to conduct its soft landing on the moon. Now, this was going to be historic because this was going to be the first time that a U.S.-built spacecraft had soft landed on the moon since the Apollo program ended in 1972. And it also would have been the very first time any private company had managed to soft land on the moon. Now, unfortunately, those hopes are dashed. Astrobotic is a small company from Pittsburgh. I know a lot of people were heartbroken by this, but this is how it goes in space. Space is hard, technologies are complex, the environment is extreme, and they're just going to have to try again.
Yeah, fascinating that private entities are making this effort. I think, if I remember correctly, I think India actually did make a lunar landing last year, or some foreign country, which is only one of few, so it's not an easy thing to do. So nonetheless, the mission is still historic in some ways. The last time the U.S. launched a moon landing, like you said, 1972. As a space historian, can you tell us the significance of at least this moment and what it might promise or portend?
Sure. In terms of overall space history, this mission is part of renewed interest and activity at the moon. So a lot of times people associate NASA with Mars. We have done many soft landings on Mars in the last 20 years, but not so much at the moon. And now we're seeing a shift back to the moon and interest and activity on the moon because of NASA's Artemis program, which is hoping not just to go to the moon for short trips like the Apollo program, but actually to build a space station in lunar orbit and a station on the lunar surface to have people sort of live and work semi-permanently on the moon as a jumping off point for missions onto Mars in the future. So this Peregrine 1 mission by Astrobotic was a very small first step in this giant leap of trying to get back to Mars.
All right, so something interesting here is there's like a side story of this. The lunar lander has a bunch of science experiments inside as well, which I didn't know. There was a time capsule, like a sliver of Mount Everest, and although they are not going to be on the moon, they will continue into outer space. So how and why were these things picked? They seem so random.
Right. So Astrobotic, the company that is behind the Peregrine 1 mission, their whole idea is to create a commercial payload delivery service to the moon. So this wasn't going to be a one-off mission for them, and hopefully it won't be. They want to continue doing this and take paying customers packages and parcels, whatever it may be, to the moon. So NASA has a number of scientific instruments that were on board. They were hoping to get to the lunar surface to do science about the lunar's exosphere and regolith. And then, of course, there were other paying customers like the company Celestis that includes cremated human remains, small samples of that, and sends those to outer space. They were going to land those on the moon. Those, of course, will now just be out in space. But what we're seeing here is the sort of culturing of the moon with human culture, not just scientific instruments.
Interesting there. So is it all a loss here, a complete loss, or will they still be able to track this thing, or is it just off in the ether and they don't, is there anything to be gleaned from this besides, oh, they gave it a good try?
There is. So I would say this mission was not a failure, but it also was not a total success either. So Astrobotic will learn so much from this experience. They will learn from the time that they have spent controlling the vehicle as it's been in space so far. Even though it's not going to make it to the moon, they're going to learn about in-space operations, communicating with their spacecraft, doing other types of maneuvers. Even just trying to figure out what went wrong is going to help them do a better job next time. Oftentimes, we have to wait to get another chance to do things like this in space, but we will only have to wait a month to see another
cool.
private company, one called Intuitive Machines, try and do the same thing, send a soft landing robot to the moon. So next month, watch out for Intuitive Machines launch of the IM-1 mission.
Okay.
So maybe we'll see you same place, same time next month?
I was going to say, you watch out for a Zoom link request 1 month from now.
Happy to do it, and hopefully we'll see a successful lunar landing that time.
Yeah, maybe. All right,
Excellent.
space historian and professor of science communication at the University of Chicago, Dr. Jordan Bimm, thanks so much for your insight. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Adrena. Thank you, Brad.
He's great to have on to really kind of learn about what we were, discussing yesterday with the launch.